My husband demanded I apologize to his female best friend because my honesty hurt her feelings. When I refused, he yelled, "Apologize or I'll divorce you." So I agreed. I went to her house, looked her straight in the eye, and in front of her husband, I said something that made them both realize women like me never bow for telling the truth. There are some moments in life that just shatter you. Moments where the ground gives way and you realize everything you believed was a lie. For me, that moment hit like a punch to the gut when my husband, Mason, stood in our living room, arms crossed, and delivered his chilling ultimatum: "Apologize to Scarlett, or I'll divorce you." He said it like he was closing a business deal, not threatening to end our 5-year marriage, a marriage I thought was built on love. His face was set in that all-too-familiar expression, the one I'd grown to despise over the last few months. The one that screamed I was being unreasonable, jealous, impossible to deal with. It was the look that made me question my own sanity, even when my gut screamed I was right. I stared at him, this man I'd promised to love and cherish, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. Or maybe the terrifying truth was I'd never really known him at all. Because the Mason I thought I married wouldn't demand I apologize to his female best friend for the crime of noticing their inappropriate relationship. The Mason I loved wouldn't gaslight me into thinking I was the problem when his emotional affair with Scarlett Pierce had been happening right under my nose for years. "You want me to apologize to her?" My voice was calmer than I felt inside. "For what exactly?" He rose with each accusation, like he was the victim. "For treating her with suspicion and coldness since the day you met her. For making her feel unwelcome in our lives. For being so jealous that you can't accept I have a meaningful friendship outside our marriage. Scarlett's been nothing but kind to you, and you've hurt her feelings with your constant attitude. She deserves an apology, and if you can't give her that, then I don't know if I can stay in this marriage." Something shifted inside me in that moment. Not heartbreak, not yet. That would come later, in waves. What I felt was clarity. Cold. Sharp. Like a blade. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when I still believed in the beautiful life Mason and I were building together. My name is Arya Montgomery, and for 5 years, I genuinely thought I had a rock-solid marriage. We met at a summer barbecue, one of those perfect July afternoons where the air hums with possibility. Mason was by the drink cooler. He had this genuine smile that made me instantly forget all the dating games. We talked for 3 hours straight, sitting on the back porch steps, the party swirling around us, completely oblivious. He listened when I talked about my work as a graphic designer. He asked thoughtful questions. He actually paid attention to details. On our first real date, he remembered I took my coffee with just a splash of cream and no sugar. He surprised me with bookstore dates because I'd mentioned loving the smell of new books. He made me feel seen in ways I hadn't experienced before. Like he was truly interested in me, not just who he wanted me to be. Our wedding came 2 years later. It was small, intimate, meaningful. String lights, wildflowers, mason jars. We invited only close family and friends. Mason cried during his vows. My mother pulled me aside, telling me she'd never seen me look happier. We settled into our cozy apartment. I worked from home, he commuted. We cooked together, talked about buying a house, having kids, traveling. Life felt stable, predictable, comfortable in all the best ways. I thought I knew exactly who I'd married and what our future looked like. Looking back now, I realize I was living in a carefully constructed illusion, seeing only what Mason wanted me to see. The cracks started to show about 6 months into our marriage. Mason came home from work, radiating excitement. He told me his college best friend, Scarlett, was moving back to town. He described her with a nostalgic warmth that initially seemed innocent. Scarlett was brilliant, he said. One of those naturally charismatic people. His closest friend during college, part of a tight group that solved the world's problems late into the night. I was genuinely happy for him. Everyone needs good friends. When I finally met Scarlett, she was exactly as he described, polished, confident, professionally dressed. She was attractive, in a carefully maintained way. What struck me immediately, though, was how Scarlett and Mason fell into an easy rhythm. They laughed about professors I'd never met, reminisced about road trips I hadn't been on, finished each other's sentences. I sat there, smiling, nodding, trying to participate, but mostly feeling like an observer. Their shared history created a language I didn't speak. Scarlett's husband, Elijah, was there too. He was quiet, an accountant, and he seemed equally peripheral. He caught my eye at one point, and we shared a brief look that I didn't fully understand then, but would later recognize as a mutual acknowledgement of our secondary status. The first small boundary violation happened so subtly, I almost didn't notice. A few weeks later, Scarlett started texting Mason during our date nights. We were at the movies, and his phone buzzed. He'd glance, type a quick response, put it away. Then it buzzed again. And again. By the time the movie started, he'd exchanged a dozen messages with Scarlett about some work presentation. He'd apologize, promise to put it away, but it kept pulling his attention like a magnetic force. This pattern repeated itself for months. Dinner dates interrupted by texts about difficult clients, weekend mornings ruined by phone calls about Scarlett's marriage problems, late evenings spent typing responses while we supposedly watched TV together. Each time I gently suggested he text her back later, Mason would look at me with barely concealed disappointment, as if I was failing some fundamental test of understanding and compassion. Then came the spare key incident. Mason gave Scarlett a key to our apartment for emergencies, without discussing it with me. I found out when I walked out of my home office one Tuesday afternoon to find Scarlett sitting on our couch, shoes off, completely at home, while Mason made her coffee. She needed our Wi-Fi, she explained cheerfully, as if this was a recurring thing I should have known about. I stood there in my own living room, feeling like an intruder. When she finally left, I asked Mason if maybe we could establish some boundaries. Mason's response was immediate and defensive. Scarlett's going through a difficult transition, he explained with exaggerated patience. New city, struggling marriage, high-pressure job. Real friends show up for each other without conditions. Are you really going to be the kind of person who puts convenience over compassion? That conversation became a template for dozens more. Every time I tried to set a boundary, Mason reframed it as me being unwelcoming, jealous, unable to handle his friendships. I started second-guessing my own instincts. Was I possessive? Unreasonable? Maybe this was what mature adult friendships looked like, and I was just too insecure to handle it. Our 5th anniversary arrived on a Tuesday in late September. I'd made reservations 2 months in advance at Meridian, an elegant restaurant. I wore the emerald dress Mason had complimented years ago. I'd planned the entire evening, dinner, a walk along the river, then home where I had a gift waiting, a leather-bound photo album documenting our entire relationship. We were halfway through our appetizers before Mason's phone started buzzing incessantly. Once, twice, 5 times in rapid succession. Each notification fractured his attention a little more until he was barely present, his eyes glued to the screen. I sat across from him, watching myself become invisible in real time. That's when I said, "Mason, it's our anniversary." And that's when he looked up with genuine confusion. "Scarlett's having a crisis. I'm just letting her know she's not alone." But I was alone. Sitting across from my husband at an expensive restaurant, on what should have been one of the most important nights of our year, while he provided emotional support to another woman. The irony was suffocating, bitter in my mouth. That night, lying in bed while Mason slept peacefully beside me, I finally admitted to myself what I'd been avoiding for months. My marriage had 3 people in it, and I was the least important one. 3 months passed after that anniversary dinner. 3 months of me trying to convince myself I was overreacting, that Mason's relationship with Scarlett was just an unusually close friendship, that my discomfort was my issue. 3 months of swallowing my instincts and forcing smiles while Scarlett continued using her spare key to drop by unannounced, and Mason continued prioritizing her texts over our conversations. Then my laptop died on a Wednesday morning in early December, right in the middle of a critical client project. The screen went black without warning. Panic set in. My deadline was in 6 hours. I needed my work files fast. Mason's laptop was in his home office. He'd told me dozens of times I could use it, that we didn't have secrets. I grabbed it, logged into my cloud storage. An hour in, I needed to reference our tax documents. Mason kept all our financial papers organized on his laptop. I navigated to a shared documents folder. That's when I saw it. Buried among work files, a folder labeled personal_private. Something about those two words made my stomach clench. Mason and I didn't keep secrets. So why would he need a private folder on a laptop he'd told me I could use freely? My hands trembled. A part of me knew I should close it and ask him later. A part of me desperately hoped it was something innocent. I clicked. The folder contained hundreds of files. Photos. Screenshots. Documents spanning back 3 years. Mason and Scarlett sitting across from each other at restaurant tables I didn't recognize, leaning in close in conversations that looked far more intimate than casual friendship. Candid shots of Scarlett, her face glowing. Selfies of the two of them, his arm around her, both smiling like they shared something precious and private. And screenshots. Dozens. Of text message conversations. I clicked on the first screenshot. Timestamp. 2 a.m., 6 months ago. Scarlett had written a long paragraph about feeling lost in her marriage to Elijah, wondering if she'd made the right choices, missing connection. Mason's response was equally long, validating her feelings, sharing his own thoughts about paths not taken and connections that transcend normal friendship boundaries. I opened another. A year ago. Late at night again. Scarlett writing about not being able to sleep, thinking about different versions of her life. Mason responding with understanding, his own confessions about what if and regrets he couldn't fully articulate to most people. My client deadline was completely forgotten. I sat frozen, clicking through screenshot after screenshot, watching a hidden relationship unfold in agonizing detail. These weren't casual check-ins. These were emotional confessions, intimate late-night conversations where two people shared their deepest feelings, regrets, and longings. Then I found the message. The one that would replay in my mind for months. Burned into my memory with the precision of acid. Scarlett sent it at 2:17 a.m., about 8 months ago, right when Mason had started seeming distant. It read, "Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if we'd gotten together instead of just staying friends back in college. Do you ever think about that?" Mason's response came just 3 minutes later, suggesting he'd been awake, waiting for her message. Or that he'd been thinking about her at 2 a.m. instead of sleeping next to his wife. His message, more than I probably should, but we made our choices. Doesn't mean I don't value what we have now. I read those words 5 times, hoping they would rearrange themselves into something less devastating. Something that could be explained away. But the meaning was crystal clear. My husband had feelings for Scarlett that went far beyond friendship. He'd been thinking about an alternative life with her, and he valued what they currently had enough to maintain years of secret communication. The worst part? The timestamp. While I'd been sleeping in our bed, Mason had been awake, engaging in emotional intimacy with another woman. I couldn't stop myself now. The Pandora's box was open. I needed to see everything. I closed the screenshots and opened our joint credit card statements, Mason's online banking portal bookmarked on his browser. I searched for patterns. Every Tuesday afternoon for the past 2 years, a charge appeared at Riverbend Cafe, an upscale bistro downtown that Mason had never once mentioned. The amounts were consistently between $50 and $70. 2 people, a nice lunch. Far more than Mason spent on a casual meal. I opened Mason's digital calendar. There it was, plain as day, every Tuesday at noon, a recurring appointment, lunch meeting. No details. Just a vague tower block. I compared the Riverbend Cafe charges with the photos in his hidden folder. They matched perfectly. The photos of Mason and Scarlett at restaurant tables had been taken at those Tuesday lunches. While I'd been at home, working, eating leftovers at my desk, assuming my husband was grabbing a quick bite, he'd been having weekly, secret lunch dates with Scarlett. Dates that required him to block off 2 full hours, involved significant money, and were important enough to maintain as a pattern for years. This wasn't an occasional catch-up. This was deliberate, sustained, carefully planned deception. Mason had been building a parallel emotional life with Scarlett, complete with standing dates, intimate late-night conversations, and shared secrets. All while coming home to me and acting like everything was normal. I sat at that desk for 2 hours straight. My client presentation completely abandoned, the deadline passing unnoticed. I read through every screenshot. I documented every suspicious charge. I looked at every photo, studying their body language, seeing things I'd missed when I'd convinced myself I was paranoid. The evidence wasn't ambiguous. This was years of documented emotional intimacy, financial proof of secret meetings, photographic evidence of a relationship that crossed every boundary. What made it worse was the sudden clarity about how thoroughly I'd been manipulated. Every time I'd expressed discomfort about Scarlett's presence, Mason had made me the problem. He'd called me jealous, possessive, insecure. He'd made me question my sanity until I started believing my discomfort was a personal failing. But my instincts had been screaming the truth the entire time. Every uncomfortable feeling, every suspicion, every moment I'd felt like the third wheel in my own marriage, all of it had been an accurate perception of a reality Mason was actively hiding from me while gaslighting me. I finally understood why Mason defended Scarlett so fiercely. Why he prioritized her texts. Why he gave her a spare key. Why he looked at me with disappointment whenever I suggested their friendship had unhealthy dynamics. Because in Mason's mind, I wasn't his priority. Scarlett was. I was the obligation, the legal wife, the person he came home to out of commitment. Scarlett was the person he thought about at 2 a.m., the person he carved out special time for every week, the person he shared his deepest feelings with. I had become the third wheel in my own marriage, and the undeniable evidence was spread across Mason's laptop screen. I sat at Mason's desk, staring at the evidence of his betrayal until the afternoon light faded. My client deadline had passed hours ago. My phone had buzzed multiple times with messages I didn't read. None of it mattered anymore compared to the wreckage of my marriage. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I found a USB drive. Methodically, I copied everything. Every photo, every screenshot, every credit card statement. I organized it all into folders with clear labels and dates, building a case like a lawyer preparing for trial. When I finished, I sat back, expecting tears or rage. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity. The kind that comes after shock wears off and you realize you're standing in wreckage that can't be rebuilt. There was almost relief in it, knowing I hadn't been crazy. That my instincts had been right all along. I looked at the clock. 3:45, Mason would be home around 6:30, expecting dinner and normal conversation. I decided to give him exactly that. At least, at first. I wanted to see if he could sit across from me and pretend everything was fine, knowing what he'd been hiding. I went to the kitchen and started preparing dinner. Chicken with roasted vegetables. One of Mason's favorites. I set the table, put on our music, creating the illusion of normalcy in our apartment that suddenly felt like a stage set. Mason walked through the door at 6:02, right on schedule. He looked tired. He smiled when he saw me, kissed my cheek. "Something smells good," he said, heading to change. "Rough day with that client presentation?" "You could say that," I replied, my voice steady. I let him decompress for 15 minutes. Long enough for him to change, pour himself wine, and settle onto the couch with his phone. I watched him scroll, probably texting Scarlett, completely oblivious. Then I walked over with his laptop already open to that hidden folder. I sat in the armchair across from him, the coffee table between us like a barrier. I turned the screen so he could see it clearly, and asked the simplest question I could formulate: "What is this?" Mason looked up from his phone, confusion crossing his face. Then recognition hit him. His eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For 3 seconds, raw panic flashed across his features. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder. His expression shifted into defensiveness so quickly. "You went through my private files?" His voice rose with indignation. "Arya, what the hell? Those are my personal things. You had no right to go snooping through my laptop." The audacity of it stunned me. He wasn't denying what was in the folder. He wasn't apologizing. His first instinct was to make me the villain. "I was using your laptop because mine crashed during a work deadline," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I needed to access our tax documents. And I found a folder labeled private that contained evidence of a years-long emotional affair with Scarlett. So, yes, I looked at it. And now I'm asking you to explain it. Mason set down his wine glass with more force than necessary. There's nothing to explain. You're misinterpreting a friendship because you've never been able to handle me being close with Scarlett. This is exactly the kind of jealous behavior I've been trying to be patient with for months. Something cold settled in my chest. He was actually going to try to gaslight me while the evidence sat between us. Mason, I read the text messages. I saw the photos from your secret Tuesday lunch dates. I found the credit card charges at Riverbend Cafe every single week for 2 years. This isn't me misinterpreting friendship. This is you having an emotional affair and lying about it. It's not an affair. Mason stood up, pacing, his voice taking on that exasperated tone he used when explaining something he thought should be obvious. Scarlett and I are close friends. We have been since college. Yes, we talk about deep things. Yes, we meet for lunch regularly. That's what real friendship looks like, Arya. Deep connection, emotional honesty, mutual support. Just because you don't have friendships like that doesn't mean they're inappropriate. Every sentence was a carefully constructed deflection, reframing his betrayal as my inadequacy. I'd heard these tactics before, but never so blatantly. Never while hard evidence sat between us, proving he was lying. She texted you at 2 in the morning asking if you ever thought about what life would have been like if you'd gotten together instead of staying friends. I said, my voice harder now. You responded that you thought about it more than you probably should. That's not friendship, Mason. That's emotional infidelity. You're twisting things. He stopped pacing, taking private conversations out of context and building some narrative in your head because you're insecure about my friendships. Scarlett and I talk about hypothetical scenarios sometimes. That doesn't mean anything inappropriate is happening. The argument continued for 2 hours. He had an explanation for everything. The late-night texts were just friends supporting each other. The secret lunch dates were regular catch-ups he didn't mention because he knew I'd react badly. The intimate conversations were normal for people with history. Every time I pointed out how his behavior crossed boundaries, he countered that I was the one with the problem. I was too jealous, too possessive, too insecure. I was exhausted from defending reality against his revised version of it. My head hurt from the circular logic. But I kept pushing because I needed him to acknowledge the truth. Needed him to stop lying and take responsibility. That's when Mason delivered the statement that would seal the fate of our marriage. He stood in the middle of our living room, arms crossed, jaw set. His voice took on that patronizing tone again. If anything, Arya, you owe Scarlett an apology. The words hung in the air. I stared at him, genuinely shocked into silence. She has been nothing but kind to you over the years, Mason continued, warming to his argument. She's tried to include you, tried to be friendly, and you've treated her with suspicion and coldness since the day you met her. She knows you don't like her. She's told me it hurts her feelings how you act around her, how you always try to limit our friendship. He was actually doing this. He was trying to make his emotional affair partner into the victim, and me into the aggressor who needed to apologize. You want me to apologize to her? My voice was oddly calm, despite the rage building. For what exactly? For noticing that my husband was having an emotional affair? For being uncomfortable with inappropriate boundaries? For trusting my instincts when you've spent months trying to convince me they were wrong? For being jealous and possessive and unable to handle me having close friendships? Mason's voice rose. For making Scarlett feel unwelcome and judged when she's done nothing wrong. She deserves an apology, and if you can't give her that, then I seriously need to reconsider this marriage. The room went absolutely silent. Even the background music seemed to fade. Mason stood there, arms crossed, his expression set, clearly believing he held all the power. He thought he was calling my bluff, forcing me to choose between my pride and our marriage. He had no idea what he'd just done. Something shifted inside me in that silence. Cold. Clear. Absolutely certain. I looked at my husband, this man who was demanding I apologize to his emotional affair partner for the crime of noticing their inappropriate relationship, and realized he'd just handed me the perfect weapon. If Mason wanted an apology, he would get one. just not the kind he was expecting. I let the silence stretch, watching him stand in his self-righteous certainty. Then I spoke, in a voice much calmer than I felt. Fine. Mason's expression shifted to surprise. He'd clearly expected more argument. I'll apologize to Scarlett, I continued, my tone completely reasonable. But let's do it properly. At her house. With Elijah there, too. If I'm going to apologize for hurting her feelings, I want to do it right, in front of both of our spouses, so everyone can hear what I have to say. Mason's face lit up with relief, and something that looked disturbingly like triumph. He actually smiled. He believed he'd won. Really? You'll do that? His voice was eager now. Absolutely, I said. Schedule it for this Saturday evening. I want to make sure everyone's there. I'll prepare what I want to say. Mason nodded enthusiastically, already pulling out his phone to text Scarlett. I watched him type, watched his face relax for the first time all evening, and felt nothing but cold clarity. He had no idea what I was actually planning. No comprehension that he'd just arranged the perfect stage for me to detonate the truth in front of everyone who needed to hear it. Mason spent the rest of that evening texting Scarlett, his face glowing with satisfaction. I watched him from across the room, this man who believed he'd just won some significant victory, and felt nothing but cold determination settling deeper into my bones. The next morning, Thursday, I woke up with absolute clarity about what needed to happen before Saturday evening. Mason left for work, kissing my forehead and reminding me to think about what I wanted to say in my apology. The moment his car pulled out, I returned to his laptop. I spent 3 hours methodically documenting everything. Detailed screenshots of every damaging conversation, organized chronologically. The early messages were friendly enough, but then they shifted gradually, crossing boundaries in increments. By the second year, Scarlett was texting him late at night about feeling disconnected from Elijah. Mason responded with validating paragraphs, sharing his own struggles. They started using pet names. You always know exactly what I need to hear, they'd written. I don't know what I'd do without you. I organized it all into folders by year and month, creating a timeline impossible to dismiss. Then I compiled the financial evidence. Our joint credit card statements, highlighting every Tuesday lunch charge at Riverbend Cafe for 2 years. I calculated the total. Over $7,000 Mason had spent on secret lunches with another woman, while we'd been saving for a house down payment. Then I found something that made my stomach turn in a different way. Buried in Mason's email inbox, receipts for gifts he'd purchased for Scarlett. A designer silk scarf from Nordstrom for her birthday last year, $250. A bottle of expensive French wine for her promotion, $180. Flowers delivered to her office when she closed a major deal, $75, with a card that read, "Always knew you could do it. So proud of you." These weren't casual friend gestures. These were gifts you buy for someone you're romantically involved with. The card messages crossed every professional and platonic boundary. I printed everything. Created digital backups in 3 separate cloud accounts Mason didn't have access to. Saved copies to 2 different USB drives, hidden in separate locations. I wasn't taking any chances. By Thursday afternoon, I had built an airtight case. But I still had one more thing to do, something that required courage I wasn't sure I possessed. I needed to call Elijah Pierce. I sat at our kitchen table, staring at my phone for 10 minutes. Mason had his contact saved. I'd probably spoken directly to Elijah fewer than a dozen times. He was quiet, reserved. But I'd seen something in his eyes at those gatherings, especially recently. A kind of resigned awareness that suggested he knew more than he was saying. The same look I'd probably been wearing myself before I found the concrete evidence. My finger hovered over the call button. Part of me wondered if this was going too far. But another part of me, the part that had been gaslit for months, knew Elijah deserved a warning. He deserved to know his world was about to change. I pressed call. He answered on the 3rd ring. "This is Elijah." "Hi, Elijah. It's Arya Montgomery, Mason's wife." I kept my voice steady. There was a brief pause. "Arya? Is everything okay? I'm calling because Mason has arranged for me to come to your house on Saturday evening to apologize to Scarlett. He insisted that the apology happen in front of both of you, and I wanted to make sure you'd be home for it. Another pause. Longer this time. I could almost hear him processing the layers beneath my words. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. More alert. Focused. I'll be there. No questions about what the apology was for. No confusion about why I was calling him directly. Just immediate understanding. Thank you, I said quietly. Then, because I needed him to understand what was really happening, I added, I think there are some things you should know. Things that have been going on that you might have suspected but didn't have proof of. The silence was heavy with recognition. Finally, Elijah spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for calling me. Those 5 words carried the weight of years of suspicion. Of being told he was paranoid. Of watching his wife's attention directed towards someone else, while being made to feel like the problem. You deserve to know the truth, I said. We both do. I'll be there Saturday, he repeated. And Arya, whatever you're planning to say, I'm ready to hear it. We hung up without saying anything more. I sat there, feeling the weight of what I'd just set in motion. Elijah knew. He'd be prepared. Meanwhile, Mason came home that evening in an excellent mood. He'd apparently had lunch with Scarlett that day. Their regular Tuesday had shifted to Thursday. He talked enthusiastically about how grateful Scarlett was, how much it would mean to her to clear the air. I nodded and smiled, internally reviewing the evidence. Friday was more of the same. Mason coached me repeatedly on what to say. He'd actually written out bullet points on his phone, acknowledge my jealousy, admit I'd misinterpreted their friendship, thank Scarlett for her patience, express gratitude. He even suggested I bring an expensive bottle of wine as a peace offering. Really show her you're serious about making amends, he'd said. Earnestly. I agreed to everything. I practiced the humble facial expressions he suggested. I asked clarifying questions about tone and body language to make him think I was genuinely preparing to deliver his scripted apology. With each coaching session, Mason's confidence grew. His shoulders relaxed. He smiled more easily. He'd successfully trained his wife to perform public submission that would cement his emotional affair partner's permanent priority in his life. Friday evening, he actually hugged me and said he was proud of me for being mature enough to work through my issues. I hugged him back, feeling the unfamiliar weight of deliberate deception. I'd never been good at lying or hiding my feelings. But something had shifted inside me since discovering that hidden folder. I'd learned from the master. That night, I lay in bed next to Mason, listening to him breathe peacefully, completely unaware that tomorrow would detonate his carefully constructed world. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept circling through what I was planning. Was I becoming vindictive? Was public humiliation really the answer? Or was I just hurt and lashing out? Did Elijah really deserve to have his marriage destroyed in front of witnesses? But every time doubt crept in, I remembered specific moments. Mason's face illuminated by his phone at our anniversary dinner. The disappointed looks he'd given me. The patronizing tone he used when explaining why my discomfort was my personal failing. The way he'd made me question my own sanity while maintaining an affair that proved I'd been right all along. I thought about all the women who stay silent because speaking truth makes others uncomfortable. Who apologize for being right because it's easier. Who shoulder blame for other people's betrayals because that's what they've been conditioned to do. And I realized what I was planning wasn't petty revenge. It was justice, clarity, and the kind of truth-telling that shatters comfortable lies people have been living in for too long. When dawn finally broke, painting the walls with pale gold light, I got up with absolute certainty. I wasn't nervous anymore. I wasn't second-guessing. I was ready to deliver the apology Mason had demanded. Just not the one he'd scripted. Saturday had arrived, and by evening, everyone would finally know the truth. Saturday arrived with clear skies and temperatures that belonged more to early September than late October. I spent the morning moving through our apartment like someone preparing for battle. Mason interpreted my quiet focus as nervousness about the apology. He kept reassuring me that everything would be fine, that Scarlett was genuinely looking forward to clearing the air, that this evening would mark a new beginning. I let him believe whatever he needed to believe. By 5 p.m., I was dressed in a simple navy dress, striking the right balance. Mason had picked out the expensive bottle of wine, wrapped it carefully. We left our apartment at 6:15 for the 25-minute drive to Scarlett and Elijah's house. Mason insisted we take his car, presenting what he called a united front. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other patting my knee. He talked the entire drive about how meaningful this was, how proud he was of me, how our marriage would be stronger. I watched suburban streets slide past. Houses. Families. None of them had any idea that in one of those similar-looking houses, 4 lives were about to detonate in ways that couldn't be put back together. Mason kept glancing at me, a hopeful expression mixed with nervousness. Part of him probably wondered if I'd back out. I gave him nothing. My expression remained neutral. I held the wine bag carefully. I nodded when he talked. I smiled when he squeezed my knee. I was the picture of a contrite wife, ready to make amends. When we pulled up to Scarlett and Elijah's house at exactly 6:40, all the interior lights were blazing. I could see Scarlett moving around, arranging something on their coffee table. Even from the car, I could tell she'd gone to effort for this, setting the stage for what she believed would be her validation and my public submission. Mason turned off the engine, then turned to me with an expression of such genuine emotion, I almost felt sorry for him. "Thank you for doing this," he said quietly. "I know it's not easy, but this means everything to me, Arya. Everything. Our marriage is going to be so much stronger after tonight. You'll see." I looked at my husband, this man who had gaslit me for months, who had demanded I apologize to his affair partner, who genuinely believed this evening would strengthen our marriage by cementing another woman's permanent priority in his life. "I know it will," I said, and squeezed his hand back. That was the last moment Mason would look at me with trust or affection, though he didn't know it yet. We walked up to the front door. Mason rang the doorbell. Scarlett opened it before the chime finished, her smile wide and barely concealing her smugness. She looked perfect, of course. Designer jeans, silk blouse, styled hair, flawless makeup. She'd dressed for the occasion. "Mason, Arya, come in." Her voice was warm, playing the gracious host. "I'm so glad we're doing this. Really, clearing the air will be good for all of us." Mason handed her the wine. Scarlett made appreciative noises, then set it aside, her focus back on me, studying my face, gauging how thoroughly Mason had broken me. Elijah appeared from the kitchen. The moment our eyes met, I saw everything I needed to know. He was alert, watchful, braced for impact. His expression had none of the resigned exhaustion I'd seen before. He knew something significant was about to happen. And unlike Mason and Scarlett, he was prepared for it to be uncomfortable. "Arya." "Mason." He nodded to both of us, his voice neutral. Then his eyes found mine again, for a fraction of a second, and I saw acknowledgement. Recognition. Maybe even gratitude. We all moved into their living room. Scarlett and Elijah settled onto their gray sectional. Mason and I took matching armchairs across from them. The coffee table between us held wine glasses already poured, a cheese board, small plates. Scarlett had clearly staged the scene. The room itself felt theatrical. Like we were all actors, but only I knew what the real plot was about to be. Mason settled into his chair, giving me an encouraging nod. His expression radiated excitement mixed with relief. Scarlett folded her hands in her lap with gracious expectation, her posture perfect, her expression carefully arranged into magnanimous forgiveness. She was ready to receive my contrition. Elijah leaned back slightly, arms crossed loosely, watching everything with focused intensity. He was the only person in that room, besides me, who understood that something was about to shift. I took a deliberate breath and set my wine glass on the coffee table. The sound of glass meeting would seemed unnaturally loud. I looked directly at Scarlett, holding her gaze, and began speaking in a voice that was calm, measured, and gave nothing away. "Scarlett, I want to start by saying that Mason was absolutely right." I paused, letting those words settle. Her smile widened with validation. "I do owe you an apology." Another pause. Scarlett's posture relaxed fractionally. Mason's face lit up with relief. Elijah's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. But not for the reasons you think. The atmosphere in that living room shifted so dramatically, I could almost feel the air pressure change. Mason's encouraging smile faltered and froze. Scarlett's expression transformed from gracious acceptance to cautious uncertainty. Elijah leaned forward slightly, his full attention locked on me, every muscle in his body alert. I continued in that same calm, measured voice, not raising my volume, just speaking truth with the kind of clarity that comes from absolute certainty. I apologize for staying silent when I should have spoken up years ago. I apologize for allowing you and Mason to continue an emotional affair right under my nose while convincing myself I was the crazy one for feeling uncomfortable. Mason tried to interrupt, his voice sharp with warning. Arya, what are you? I raised my hand, cutting him off mid-sentence without even looking at him. My eyes stayed locked on Scarlett's face, watching her carefully constructed facade begin to crack. Let me finish. You demanded an apology. I'm giving you one. Then I turned my attention to Elijah, whose face had gone completely still. I pulled out my phone, with hands that were steady despite everything, opened the folder I'd so carefully organized, and began speaking in that same measured tone. I apologized to Elijah, actually, because he deserved to know the truth about his wife long before tonight. For the past 3 years, Mason and Scarlett have been meeting every Tuesday for secret lunch dates at Riverbend Cafe. They've been having late-night text conversations about alternative life choices they wish they'd made together, about intimate regrets and emotional connections that cross every boundary a married person should respect. I handed my phone directly to Elijah, watching his face as he took it with trembling hands. His eyes moved across the screen, reading the first message, then scrolling, then the next. The color drained from his face so completely, he looked like he might be sick. But his hands kept moving, kept scrolling, methodically reviewing every piece of evidence. Mason was on his feet now, his voice rising with panic. Elijah, don't listen to this. She's taking things completely out of context. You know how Arya gets about my friendship with Scarlett. She's always been jealous, and now she's trying to destroy. How long? Elijah's voice cut through Mason's explanation like a blade through paper. He didn't raise his volume. He didn't need to. The coldness in those 2 words silenced everything else in the room. He was still looking at my phone, still scrolling, but his question was directed at Scarlett with absolute precision. The room fell into a silence so complete, I could hear someone's watch ticking. Scarlett's mouth opened and closed. Her perfectly composed expression had cracked completely, tears forming in her carefully made-up eyes. She tried the reflexive denial first, her voice shaking. It's not what it looks like. Mason and I are just close friends. We've always been close. There's nothing physical between us. Nothing inappropriate has actually happened. Elijah finally looked up from my phone, and the expression on his face made even me take a step back. It wasn't rage exactly, though that was there. It was something colder and more devastating. Recognition. Vindication. Years of suppressed suspicion finally given permission to surface. I didn't ask if you slept with him, Elijah said, his voice still controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of fury more frightening than shouting would have been. I asked how long you've been having an emotional affair with Mason while making me feel crazy for noticing. The parallel to my own experience was so perfect it felt orchestrated. We had both been living the same nightmare of gaslighting and manipulation, just from different angles. Both told we were paranoid or insecure or unable to handle mature adult friendships. Both made to feel like the problem while our spouses maintained an inappropriate relationship right in front of us. Scarlett's facade shattered completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Elijah, please. You're misunderstanding. We never meant for anything to 3 years. Elijah's voice was flat, reading from the timestamps on my phone. According to these messages, this has been going on for at least 3 years. 3 years of secret lunches. 3 years of late-night conversations about regretting your life choices. 3 years of you telling him things you never told me. He scrolled further, his jaw tightening. Here's one from 8 months ago where Scarlett asks Mason if he ever thinks about what life would have been like if he'd gotten together instead of staying friends. And Mason responds that he thinks about it more than he probably should. Mason had found his voice again, but instead of apologizing, he went straight into damage control. He was standing now, his face flushed with anger and humiliation, pointing at me. Arya, you're destroying everything. This isn't what I meant when I asked you to apologize. You twisted what I asked you to do. You've taken private conversations completely out of context, and you're using them as weapons to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. His voice cracked with desperation as he tried to reframe the entire situation, to make my truth-telling seem like manipulation rather than simple honesty. He turned to Elijah, palms up in a placating gesture. Look, Elijah, you have to understand. Scarlett and I have been close friends since college. We have history. Yes, maybe we talk more than typical friends do. Maybe we're more emotionally connected than some people might think is appropriate. But nothing physical has ever happened between us. We've never crossed that line. Arya's jealousy has blown a close friendship completely out of proportion. But Elijah wasn't listening to Mason's revised narrative. He was still scrolling through my phone, reading message after message where Mason and Scarlett crossed boundaries that no amount of explanation could justify. His expression grew colder, more closed. It says here, you bought her a designer scarf for her birthday, Elijah said quietly, reading from the email receipt side included. $250. And expensive wine for her promotion. Flowers sent to her office. He looked up at Scarlett. You told me those flowers were from a grateful client. Scarlett's tears were flowing freely now. Elijah, I can explain how much money has Mason spent on you over the past 3 years. Elijah cut her off, while telling me we needed to be more careful with our budget. Mason's attempts to control the narrative were falling apart in real time. The evidence spoke louder than his deflections, and Elijah was clearly someone who trusted facts over explanations. I stood up slowly, smoothing my navy dress and picking up my purse while Mason continued his desperate explanations to an audience that had stopped listening. The time had come for me to leave, to walk away from the explosion I detonated and let it burn through whatever was left. I looked at Mason directly, meeting his eyes for what would probably be the last time with any kind of intimacy. You demanded I apologize for speaking truth, I said. I just did. You told me to do it in front of Elijah. Done. You threatened me with divorce if I didn't comply. Well, Mason, consider this my answer to that threat. Then I turned to Elijah, whose expression had shifted to something complex, painful gratitude mixed with devastation, anger at the betrayal mixed with relief. I've sent you copies of everything to your email address. All the screenshots, all the financial records, all the evidence you need to make informed decisions about your marriage. You deserve to know the truth, and I'm genuinely sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Mason grabbed my arm as I moved toward the door. His grip was tight enough to hurt, his fingers digging into my skin with desperate strength. His voice had shifted from angry to pleading. You can't just walk out. We need to talk about this, Arya. Please. You're my wife. We can work through this if you just calm down and be reasonable. I pulled my arm free with more force than I'd intended, leaving red marks where his fingers had been. I met his eyes one final time. No, Mason. You need to talk to your lawyer. Because I'm done being the understanding wife in a 3-person marriage where I was always the least important person. I walked toward the door without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Scarlett sobbing, her composure completely destroyed. I could hear Elijah's cold questions continuing, his voice controlled, but carrying that undercurrent of fury. I could hear Mason's increasingly desperate attempts to explain, to justify, to somehow salvage something from the wreckage. But none of it was my problem anymore. I stepped out into the cool October evening air and closed the door behind me, muffling the sounds of their imploding marriages. The suburban street was quiet, peaceful, completely at odds with the devastation I'd just left behind. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called for a ride share. The driver arrived within 10 minutes. I climbed into the back seat, gave him my address, then spent the entire 30-minute drive staring out the window at suburban streets passing by. Houses with lights on, families inside. People living their normal Saturday evenings, completely unaware that in one similar-looking house, 4 lives had just detonated. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty for the devastation I'd caused. I destroyed my own marriage, yes, but I'd also destroyed Scarlett and Elijah's. I'd humiliated Mason and Scarlett publicly. I'd handed Elijah information that would likely haunt him. But mostly, I felt relieved. Like I'd finally stopped carrying a weight I hadn't realized was crushing me for so long. When the rideshare dropped me off at our apartment building, I walked through the lobby and up to our floor feeling like I was moving through a different world than the one I'd left that morning. I unlocked our door and stepped inside. Immediately, the space felt different. Lighter somehow. Less suffocating. Mason's things were everywhere. His jacket, his shoes, his laptop still on the desk. But they all felt temporary now, like artifacts from a life that had already ended. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on our couch in the quiet apartment, and let myself feel the full weight of what came next. I sat on that couch, nursing my wine and waiting. Part of me wondered if Mason would come home at all that night. But some deeper instinct told me he'd come back, if only to try one more time to control the narrative. His key turned in the lock at 1:47 a.m. I'd been watching the clock, existing in that strange suspended state between exhaustion and hyper-awareness. The door opened and Mason walked in. The man who entered our apartment looked nothing like the confident husband who'd left it just 5 hours earlier. His face was ravaged, eyes red and swollen from what must have been crying, though I'd never seen Mason cry except at our wedding. His hair stood up in places where he'd clearly been running his hands through it. His shirt was wrinkled. He looked like someone who'd aged a decade in an evening. He stood in the doorway, staring at me for a long moment. Then he closed the door behind him with careful control and walked into the living room. The look on his face was something I'd never seen before. Equal parts devastation and fury. Grief and rage. All competing for dominance. How could you do that? His voice came out raw, scraped clean of its usual confident tone. How could you humiliate me like that? Destroy my friendship? Share private conversations that you had no right to see in the first place? I took another sip of wine. Said nothing. I'd said everything that needed saying at Scarlett's house. Now it was Mason's turn to deal with consequences. He started pacing, agitated. You violated my privacy. You went through my personal files, read my private messages, and then you weaponized them to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed 2 marriages because you couldn't handle me having a close friendship. This was the anger phase. I recognized it. Deny, deflect, attack, make the person who discovered the betrayal into the villain. I let him rant for 20 minutes, cycling through accusations about my jealousy and insecurity. Then he shifted strategies, sitting down on the armchair, hands clasped. The bargaining phase. Look, I know I made mistakes, he said, his voice softer, more reasonable. Maybe Scarlett and I got too close. Maybe I didn't set appropriate boundaries. But we can work through this, Arya. We can go to couples therapy. I'll put distance between myself and Scarlett. Whatever you need. Our marriage is worth fighting for. I set down my wine glass and looked at him directly. Mason, I'm filing for divorce. His face went through another rapid evolution. Shock first, then calculation, then manipulation. His features arranged themselves into wounded confusion. You're overreacting, he said, that patronizing tone returning. You're emotional right now, understandably. But destroying our marriage over a friendship that you misinterpreted isn't the answer. You're letting your insecurities ruin something good. This is exactly what I was trying to help you work through. And there it was. Even now. Even caught with irrefutable evidence of his affair. Mason was still trying to make this my failing. I stood up and walked to our bedroom without another word, closing and locking the door behind me. I heard Mason call after me. Heard him try the door handle. Heard him spend another hour pacing the living room. Around 2 a.m., I heard him finally settle on the couch, probably too exhausted to keep performing. The next morning, he tried yet another approach. The wounded husband who just wanted to save his marriage. He called in sick to work and spent the entire day following me around our apartment, trying to initiate conversations about rebuilding trust. But I was done. Done fighting. Done explaining. Done accepting blame for other people's betrayals. On Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after I detonated our lives at Scarlett's house, I called Victoria Brennan. I'd gotten her name from a colleague who'd been through a similar situation. Victoria had a reputation for being thorough, uncompromising, and completely unsympathetic to spouses who tried to manipulate. Her office was downtown, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Victoria herself was in her mid-50s, professionally dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a direct manner I found immediately reassuring. Our first consultation lasted 2 hours. I showed her everything. The screenshots, the credit card statements, the photos, the gift receipts. Victoria reviewed each piece of evidence with focused intensity. When she finished, she gave me her assessment with straightforward honesty. Emotional affairs are harder to prove than physical ones in divorce proceedings, but the documentation you've compiled is exceptionally comprehensive. This shows a clear pattern of deception spanning years, financial evidence of resources being diverted outside the marriage, and communication that crosses appropriate boundaries. We can absolutely use this. She laid out her strategy: file for divorce on grounds of marital misconduct based on emotional infidelity. Push for a favorable settlement. He'll try to make you the villain, Victoria said with the confidence of someone who'd seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times. He'll claim you're jealous, vindictive. Don't let him. The evidence speaks for itself. I hired her on the spot. 2 weeks after the explosive apology, I received an email that surprised me. The sender was Elijah Pierce. The subject line, "Thank you." I opened it with curiosity and apprehension. The message explained that Elijah had filed for divorce the Monday after our confrontation. Armed with the evidence I'd provided, he wrote about years of suspecting something was wrong, but convincing himself he was paranoid. My apology had given him both validation and proof. The evidence had made it impossible for Scarlett to deny or minimize what had been happening. He asked if we could meet for coffee sometime, carefully clarifying that it wasn't anything romantic or complicated. He just wanted to talk with someone who understood exactly what it felt like to be the third priority in your own marriage. I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown. Elijah looked different than I'd ever seen him. The resigned exhaustion was gone, replaced by something more solid and present. He looked like someone who'd finally stopped carrying a weight. Our conversation flowed easily. There was no need for pretense. We'd both seen each other at our worst moments, both been publicly humiliated in the same living room, both discovered our instincts had been right all along. Elijah told me about years of watching Scarlett's face light up when Mason called, about expressing discomfort and being told he was too sensitive, too jealous. It was like listening to my own experiences reflected back. We'd been living parallel nightmares. Through mutual friends and social media, I learned that Mason and Scarlett tried to make a real relationship work. The predictability of it was almost funny. Once their connection was no longer forbidden or secret, once they had to deal with actual relationship logistics instead of stolen emotional moments, the fantasy collapsed. They lasted exactly 4 months. Mutual friends reported growing tensions almost immediately. Scarlett struggled with Mason's financial situation after the divorce settlements left him stretched thin. Mason discovered that Scarlett's constant need for attention, which had seemed endearing from a distance, became exhausting when it was his full-time responsibility. The relationship that had seemed so special and deep when conducted through texts and secret lunches turned out to be mostly illusion. They broke up quietly, without the dramatic explosion that had marked the end of their marriages. Just a sad fizzle. What they had wasn't love. It was the thrill of an emotional affair and the validation of being someone's secret priority. The knowledge that their relationship had imploded so spectacularly gave me a strange sense of closure. Not satisfaction, exactly, though there was an element of vindication. More like confirmation that my instincts had been correct all along. 6 months after that explosive Saturday night, I sat in Victoria's downtown office, signing the final divorce papers. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows. Victoria had negotiated a settlement that was more favorable than I'd expected. Mason agreed to split our savings evenly, let me keep the apartment, and even pay half my legal fees. Victoria suspected his unusual generosity stemmed from wanting to end proceedings quickly before more details of his relationship with Scarlett became public record. His colleagues and family were already asking uncomfortable questions. I signed my name on page after page, watching my signature legally transform me back into just Arya Montgomery. Each signature felt like closing a door I'd been trying to shut for months. When I signed the last page, Victoria smiled and extended her hand. Congratulations. You're officially divorced. I shook her hand, gathered my copies, and walked out. I'd expected this moment to feel heavier, sadder. I'd expected some echo of grief for the marriage I'd believed in. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I'd finally removed a heavy winter coat I'd been wearing for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to move freely. The afternoon sun seemed brighter, warmer, carrying the kind of promise that comes with genuine new beginnings. My weekly coffee meetings with Elijah had continued throughout the divorce proceedings. What started as mutual support between two people who'd survived similar betrayals gradually evolved into something more complicated and interesting. We met every Wednesday afternoon. At first, our conversations centered on processing the trauma. We compared notes on gaslighting tactics, traded stories about red flags we'd ignored, and found comfort in being understood by someone who'd lived through the same specific nightmare. But somewhere around the third month, our conversations shifted. We talked less about past pain and more about present lives and future possibilities. We discovered shared interests that had nothing to do with our failed marriages. We both loved old black and white films. We both preferred hiking trails that were slightly difficult to find, but rewarded you with solitude. We both appreciated quiet mornings where silence felt comfortable. One Wednesday afternoon in early spring, Elijah suggested we meet for dinner instead of coffee. Something about the way he asked made it clear this was a different kind of invitation. "There's a new Italian place that opened downtown," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I thought maybe we could try it together, if you're interested." I looked at this quiet man. We were both gun-shy about jumping into anything serious, both carrying damage that would take time to heal. But we'd built something honest between us over these months. A foundation based on truth instead of illusion. "I'd like that," I said. We took things slowly, but the foundation felt different this time. Solid, in ways my marriage to Mason never had been. I ran into Mason unexpectedly about 8 months after our divorce was finalized. I was in the grocery store produce section, reaching for a bag of organic apples, when another hand reached for the same bag. We both pulled back, started to apologize, then recognized each other. Mason looked different. Older. More worn. New lines around his eyes. More gray in his hair. He'd lost weight, but not in a healthy way. "Arya," he said finally. "How are you?" I kept my answers. Simple and honest. "I'm good. Working on some interesting design projects, enjoying the apartment, building a life that feels right." Mason nodded, something that might have been genuine happiness crossing his face. "I'm glad you're doing well." He looked like he wanted to say something more significant, wrestling with words. Finally, he spoke quietly, almost too soft for me to hear. "I made mistakes. A lot of them. I handled our marriage poorly. I wish I'd listened when you tried to tell me the truth about my relationship with Scarlett." The apology was real. I could hear that. But it came far too late. Some things can't be unsaid. Some damage can't be undone. I appreciated the acknowledgement, but felt nothing beyond that. No anger anymore. No hurt. Just recognition that this was a person I used to know who taught me important lessons about boundaries and self-trust. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. There was a pause. Then I asked, because some part of me was curious about how their story ended. "How's Scarlett?" Mason's expression closed off immediately. "We broke up months ago. Turns out what we had didn't translate well into an actual relationship. Once it wasn't secret anymore." He laughed without humor. "I'm living in a studio apartment across town, working through my own process of figuring out who I am outside the fantasy I'd been maintaining." We parted cordially after that. Both of us aware that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. They can only be acknowledged as part of the landscape that shaped us into whoever we become next. Today, I live in an apartment that no longer carries any trace of Mason or our marriage. I redecorated completely, erasing visual reminders and replacing them with choices that reflect only my taste and preferences. The bookshelves hold novels I actually want to read. The walls feature artwork that speaks to me. The furniture is arranged for my comfort and daily life. The silence here isn't lonely. It's peaceful. The sound of a life reclaimed, of boundaries respected, of truth spoken without apology. Elijah and I are still taking things slow, still rebuilding trust that was demolished in our previous marriages. But what we're building feels different this time. Honest instead of performed. Based on respect instead of manipulation. Built between two people who understand the value of truth because we both paid the price for living in lies. I think about that night sometimes, that explosive apology that detonated multiple lives in Scarlett's carefully staged living room. Part of me still wonders if I could have handled it differently, more privately, with less public devastation. But mostly, I understand that some truths need to be spoken loudly. They need to be witnessed by everyone who's been affected by the lies. Mason wanted me to kneel and apologize for hurting Scarlett's feelings. I gave him exactly what he demanded. I just made sure the apology revealed every uncomfortable truth he'd been working so hard to hide. The moral crystallized clearly over these months of rebuilding. Never force an apology from a woman who speaks truth. Because women like me don't apologize for seeing clearly. We apologize for staying silent too long. And when we finally speak, we burn down every carefully constructed lie. Mason learned too late that forcing someone to apologize is only a victory if you control what they're apologizing for. I didn't bow for truth. I weaponized it. And in doing so, I reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is refuse to pretend anymore. The silence I live in now isn't the silence of submission. It's the silence of peace that comes after you finally stop carrying other people's lies and start living in the clear, bright light of your own truth.